What's going on, everybody? It is another episode of Dynasty SZN. I'm your host, Patrick Hart. It's just going to be me for a little while, and we're going to do about 2 videos a week. I want to thank everybody who has returned after about a little over a month off here. I actually ended up getting COVID after 2 years of escaping it and starting a new job. So in that time, I wasn't putting out podcasts, and Austin has a busy schedule as well. So it's just gonna be me for a little while, and maybe Austin joins us later, or maybe we get a different co-host and get somebody else who wants to do some fantasy analyst stuff with us. But for now, it's just gonna be me. We're going to try and do 2 episodes a week while I'm kind of learning a new job and a little bit busy. Once we get closer to the season and I have more of a routine down, we'll go for maybe 3 and then maybe something more short form every day from there. So today I want to sit down and I want to talk about some rookies that could put up some production in year one. They may not have incredible long-term value. They may not work out. But these are cheap guys. I didn't want to do anybody that was real expensive. The most expensive guy I'm going to talk about today is probably Jaylen Tolbert. And you could say it's because I'm a Cowboys fan, but hey, I like Jaylen Tolbert. So let's start with the wide receivers. Jaylen Tolbert, we'll just take him as our first guy here. The big thing I like about Jaylen Tolbert is the amount of touchdowns and targets that are available in this offense. We saw Cedric Wilson step in times when Gallup was out. We saw Gallup have big games as the number 3 wide receiver. Amari Cooper's gone, and Gallup may not be ready to start the year. These are the same type of plays as if you could have Jaylen Tolbert or James Washington. They both may have the same shot at getting production this year, especially early in the season if Michael Gallup isn't ready. But there's still room in this offense for a third guy, and one of them could win that role for the season. But long term, on a dynasty side of things, James Washington's only on a 1-year deal. So the upside to Jaylen Tolbert is production this year. The downside is maybe you wait until next year and get production. But I think he's a good enough player to beat out James Washington. James Washington is, one of those guys that if you need to fill a spot early in the season, say you have DeAndre Hopkins and you may need some first 6 weeks production while Michael Gallup's out, maybe James Washington is a guy that you don't want to start, but maybe he's filling in your flex spot now that you bumped everybody up. So Jaylen Tolbert could have some good year one production, and him and Mechie, which is the next receiver I'm going to talk about. Him and Mechie, I think, are the 2 that could really, for their ADP, provide more production than we expect. So let's talk about Mechie a little bit. Mechie is the second wide receiver, I think, who can provide more production than we expect. Mechie wasn't a great separator in college. He was pretty good with the ball in space, though, making people miss and getting extra yards. He could be a perfect slot receiver for this Texans team. Now they've got Nico Collins and they've got Chris Conley. But Chris Conley came back on a 1-year minimum money deal. Wasn't super involved last year. We really saw Brandon Cooks be the only true pass catcher we wanted in that offense. But Davis Mills was arguably the best rookie quarterback. I don't know how big of a step this team is really going to take this year, because they're not going to be a good team. But they now have Marlon Mack and Dameon Pierce. They have Davis Mills in year 2. They've got, okay weapons at wide receiver with those guys, with Nico Collins, who they drafted last year, who did take that number 2 wide receiver role down the stretch. Now they draft John Mechie. They just extended Brandon Cooks, and I think there is room for a second wide receiver to possibly be fantasy relevant in just a volume catches kind of, a PPR aspect. I don't know. I'm not expecting Mechie to go out and, get a bunch of yards because, he's coming off an injury as well. But down the stretch, I think there is a chance that he could fill into that slot receiver role for the Texans and really provide value to your fantasy team. If this offense is just a little bit better, we saw Davis Mills look like he could lead an offense. We don't know how high his ceiling is, and we don't know how committed the team is to him. So, worst case scenario with John Mechie, say he is on the pup, misses the first 4 weeks, comes in, still learning the offense, doesn't really get involved until, week 10 maybe, and week 12, plays 6 weeks, shows that he has some upside, shows that he could be a receiver there. And, the next year they draft a top quarterback. I think that we could really see his value go sky high. Even if they don't, I think Davis Mills may put up enough fantasy production to kind of get us a flex play option. I don't know how overall his points per game, they may not be great. But when we look back at the season, we may say, hey, I didn't expect John Mechie to score that many points. He wasn't really usable in fantasy, but he could get some production. So those are a couple wide receivers that, I didn't want to go with the Sky Moores, those guys, the Christian Watson. I thought about talking about Romeo Doubs a little bit because of all of the available targets that we talked about for Christian Watson. Romeo Doubs is the same team, same opportunities, and maybe a better ready to go wide receiver than Christian Watson is. Christian Watson is an athletic freak, but if you need to, get somebody who can just get out there and be serviceable, how long is Sammy Watkins going to be healthy? That's always the question. We can see Sammy Watkins put up 40 points with Aaron Rodgers in week 1. And week 2, he's not playing, and Romeo Doubs ends up being the guy. We don't know. It's really hard to predict who Aaron Rodgers is going to build chemistry with. But I was looking at splits today of Aaron Rodgers with and without Davante Adams, and his stats are virtually identical. I know Davante Adams is a game changer, and the things he can do in the red zone and off the line of scrimmage are incredible. The chemistry that him and Rodgers had was great. But Aaron Rodgers is back-to-back MVP, and he didn't do it solely because of Davante Adams. We think about the year before, look how many touchdowns Robert Tonyan scored. Now, we were all afraid of Robert Tonyan because of his touchdown rate, but Aaron Rodgers is going to get the ball in the end zone. And I think having any of those pieces, especially the cheap pieces that could turn out to be, those are league-winning type of players. If it's Allen Lazard who becomes the wide receiver 1, which I don't think is going to happen, if he becomes the wide receiver 1, he's a league winner if you get him at his price right now. I think Christian Watson is the only one that you're really having to spend anything on. And I think other guys have just as much of an opportunity to absorb some of those targets and touchdowns than Christian Watson. So there's a little bit of talk on Romeo Doubs, but I didn't really dive into him as much as I did with Tolbert and Mechie in preparing for the video, so I won't pull any stats or anything out. But if you look at those 3 wide receivers as possible first-year contributors to an offense, they produce fantasy points and may help your team in a bind. But at the worst case, they have positive situations going forward as well. So the next guy I'm going to talk about, we're going to change positions. We're going to talk about a running back. And again, just like with the wide receivers, I don't want to talk about your Sky Moore, your Christian Watson. I don't want to talk about those running backs either. I don't want to talk about the guys everybody's talking about, your Damian Pierce, your Tyler Algier, those guys. I'm going to talk about a different guy, and he's in a very, very crowded backfield, and it's Pierre Strong. I know that there are a billion running backs in New England. Sorry. But we saw them use James White at the start of the year. We saw them use Brandon Bolden throughout the rest of the year when James White was hurt. We know the two-headed rushing attack is Ramondre Stevenson, Damian Harris. We don't know what that split's going to look like. We don't know if Ramondre is going to get some third down work. We just don't know. But we do know they brought back James White, who's coming off of a hip injury. He's still not 100%. He's limited at OTAs, but it was a 2-year deal for, a couple $1,000,000. It wasn't anything crazy, but the amount of targets that they give to that change of pace third down back is substantial. James White played 2 weeks before he went out with injury. Now, granted, this is prior to Ramondre really becoming anything. He didn't really get work yet. So at this point, it was really just James White playing that change of pace role. But he had 13 targets in the first 2 weeks. And we saw Brandon Bolden down the stretch get plenty of targets as well. So it really doesn't, hurt us at all to go get Pierre Strong. The cost for Pierre Strong, I think, is worth the flyer. If you look at Brandon Bolden, after week 2, 9 points, 16, 7, 19, 11, 10, 10, 8, 9, 22 in week 18. Those receiving backs are worth something. 4 targets, 6 targets, 4 targets, 7 targets, 4 targets, 5. So you're not looking for him to be somebody that you have to play every week. But if you can get that production out of a basically free running back, I think it's worth holding on to. And at worst case scenario, you drop him week 3 because James White is healthy and back, and you pick up somebody else off of waivers. It's not a guy you need to truly stash on your taxi. If you want to, and you want to try and wait out the Damian Harris exit, maybe James White moves on. He's older. He's 33, I believe. So maybe you want to move on from that. So you could stash him on your taxi and wait and see if he gets that role. But there's one other thing to this whole kind of running back by committee thing with New England that we have to remember. There's a new coach in Las Vegas, and it's Josh McDaniels. So we don't know who's calling the offense. We think it may be Patricia, according to most recent reports. But before that, it was Bill Belichick. And then there was talk of Joe Judge. And we don't know what is going to happen here. And some of those question mark backfields, if you can get a piece like Kevin Harris, Pierre Strong, and just see what happens if they make the roster. If they make the roster, you could go from a free asset to something you can trade for a next year pick after one good week. Damian Harris or Ramondre Stevenson go down, and all of a sudden Kevin Harris is getting more work, and we don't know who is going to be the goal line back anymore because Damian Harris is the guy, or Ramondre Stevenson gets hurt and Damian Harris is, he's missed some time. He's always kind of bruised up. He reminds me of Josh Jacobs, who just scores touchdowns and it plays through injury. We saw him come up with the hammy on a breakaway run last year. He's always out there, but he's always seeming to be playing dinged up. You're checking on Wednesday, Thursday on the injury report. Well, did he practice? Do we think he's going to play? Um, any of those games where those guys don't play, Pierre Strong, Kevin Harris, both of them, I think, could get opportunities. This is mainly a Pierre Strong PPR take, but I think, Kevin Harris is also somebody worth taking a stab at. So it's just options available to you for cheaper prices than the other guys we're talking about. So that's really the main running back I wanted to talk about. We talked a little bit about Kevin Harris as well, but let's go over to the tight end position. Tight ends year one, we really don't expect a lot. But there has been some buzz about Daniel Bellinger at the New York Giants, taking first team reps, being an immediate contributor, being a part of the offense. And I know what you're thinking. The Giants suck. They had 6 passing touchdowns last year to tight ends and receivers, and Evan Ingram led that with 3. Darius Slayton had 2. Running backs had as many receiving touchdowns, I think, as wide receivers in that offense. Daniel Jones was hurt. Saquon was kind of Saquon, not really. But they've got Dable. I don't know how much faith I want to put in Daniel Jones, but I will say this. It's going to be hard to be as bad as last year for all of those fantasy assets. Sterling Shepard was kind of the PPR guy that we had as a usable fantasy asset in that offense. But he's coming off an Achilles injury. Kenny Golladay is the ghost of production past and is probably not something I'm willing to bet on at this point. So Evan Ingram leaves. He goes to Jacksonville. Led the team in receiving touchdowns. Granted, it was only 3. But they bring in Ricky Seals-Jones. They bring in Jordan Akins from Houston. And then they draft Daniel Bellinger. Jordan Akins and Ricky Seals-Jones are not adequate competition for any tight end depth chart. If those are the guys you're going against, I think you have a great chance as a prospect to earn playing time. Now, I don't think Dable is going to turn Daniel Jones into Josh Allen. But if we look at who has been running their offense the last few years, whether it's Freddie Kitchens, Joe Judge, or Jason Garrett, I'm putting way more trust in their new offensive mind. I don't see any way they can be as bad as they were. And that means all of these guys are being undervalued right now. Doesn't mean they're all going to hit. It doesn't mean you're not going to draft Darius Slayton in the last round of best ball and he ends up being worthless. That can still happen. But between Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, Kenny Golladay, Sterling Shepard, and Daniel Bellinger, they've got targets to go around. They are going to score more touchdowns than they did last year. There is no way they are that bad. And I know that, that team has not really given us any reason to have that faith in them. But I don't think their defense is horrible either. They've got Jordan Love, they've got Xavier McKinney, they've got some decent safeties. Jabril Peppers is gone, but he was injured last year. James Bradbury is gone, but they brought in Kayvon Thibodeau, and they have Blake Martinez back, who missed all of last year after week 1 or 2, tore his pec. Tay Crowder as that second linebacker. They've got okay defensive players. It's really going to be how is the offense on this team? Because the offense is going to be what wins them games. Their offensive line has been bad. Is it going to be any better? We're going to have to see. So I am willing to take a chance on Daniel Bellinger if he is looking like he is going to be the tight end one to start the season. He's not a guy I'm really looking to stash on my taxi squad if he's not. He's a guy that if I think he may, get me a 3rd round pick next year, take him. Other than that, I'll probably just hang on to him, see if he works out. But long term, if they're not good this year, we could be looking at new rookie quarterback. We could be looking at whole turnover at wide receivers. They could bring in another veteran tight end that really helps bolster that. I don't know if I am long-term invested if it doesn't work out this season. This season is very much make or break for Daniel Jones. And any of those weapons are hard to predict going forward. Besides, maybe you still have hope in Kadarius Toney or Wan'Dale Robinson. I've kind of been out on Wan'Dale from the beginning. Just it's a size problem for me. I can't bet on him being more than a gadget player right now. So price versus what I expect production wise, it's not that I won't take Wan'Dale, because all the arguments I made here for Daniel Bellinger, I think apply to Wan'Dale. I think the offense has to be better. I still think we could see turnover at wide receiver, which could lead up to us just seeing Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, Kenny Galladay's ghost, and maybe Darius Slayton for another year, right? Like, who else? There's going to be turnover here. If they're bad, you could still kind of hang on to those assets, the Wan'Dale and the Kadarius Toney. But I don't think I'm making that bet with Daniel Bellinger. He wasn't this incredible prospect. He's not Pat Freiermuth. He's nothing of the sort. But he could be a Dalton Schultz if things broke great for 2 years. That's what I'm looking at. I'm not looking for him to be insanely explosive. I'm not looking for him to get deep targets downfield. I'm not looking for, a ton of red zone usage unless the rest of the offense sucks. I expect Saquon, Kadarius Toney, and those guys to really be the red zone weapons. So I'm really just viewing him as Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram scored 3 touchdowns and led the team. I'm not expecting 3 touchdowns to lead the team next year. But I could see Daniel Bellinger scoring 3 touchdowns of 25. So I think there is plenty of room to grow in this offense, and I think that for the tight end position, it's already so shallow. And if he catches 5 passes a week for 40 yards and puts up 9 points, he doesn't kill your team. And if he scores a touchdown, then he's, a tight end one. So it's not pretty, but a lot of tight ends aren't. So, that was the offensive players. And if you only play offense, you're probably at this point you can check out. But I'll tempt you with this. IDP is the greatest thing I have ever started doing in fantasy. It has really made me enjoy watching football more when my offensive players for fantasy aren't on the field. I get to learn more about these defenses and what schemes are good against what. It helps me with my redraft information. You learn what defenses are doing what and helps you with your matchups and how you want to prepare. And so it has broadened my football IQ, and it has also added a ton of fun to fantasy football. So if you're not playing IDP, I recommend giving it a try. There's a couple linebackers I want to talk about, and one is Nikobi Dean. He fell because of injury, but they're already saying he could play every snap through it and not get surgery. It's a risk. You're taken the injury risk that the teams in the NFL didn't want to take, right? But we saw the same thing with Justin Ross. Teams went and got him. And if he stays healthy, he's going to be great. So he was a top prospect in this draft prior to all the injury news. So if he stays healthy and he's on the field and he's playing in that Eagles defense where we've seen TJ Edwards rack up tackles, we've seen Alex Singleton rack up tackles, we saw Nate Jerry before that rack up tackles. Their linebackers produce fantasy points for IDP. So Nikobi Dean fell in the draft. You're still going to take him in the second round of a rookie draft if you're taking IDP players. I still have Devin Lloyd ahead of him, but him, Troy Anderson, Devin Lloyd, they're all up there. But there's a lot of fear around Nikobi Dean because of the injury and how he fell in the draft. But the next one I do want to talk about is Troy Anderson. Now, Quay Walker, first round pick, but I don't want him. I'd rather have Troy Anderson. Troy Anderson is athletic freak, like top percentile in everything. His raw athletic scores through the roof. He was a quarterback, and then he was a running back, and then he was a linebacker. And he was like all conference in all of them in his 3 years in college. He's just an athletic freak. But the Falcons brought in Rashaan Evans this year. They are also, in talks of maybe trading or cutting Deion Jones. He's got a lot of money owed to him. So Aluakun's gone. They could really have a role for Troy Anderson to produce year one. Worst case scenario, maybe you have to wait a year. Maybe it's a Zaven Collins sort of situation where they don't put him in year one much. He's not playing an every down role. He's rotating. Maybe Rashaan Evans plays every down, which would surprise me because he's been so poor in coverage and he's really been that rotational linebacker. I could see him starting as a rotational piece and then earning that spot full time, but he's just an athletic freak that I have been very high on since pre-draft, and I'm still willing to draft, especially when you can get him much later than you're taking Nikobi Dean, Devin Lloyd, Quay Walker. Those guys are second round picks and rookie drafts with IDP. So I think for the price of Troy Anderson, you could get the same thing as you get in Nikobi Dean. So they are a little bit apart, but if you look at projections from Sleeper, which these are terrible, I will give you that. He's projected 8 points less than Quay Walker, 18 points less than Nikobi Dean. Now projected above them all is Leo Chenal, which I don't think is going to happen, but I think he definitely is a rotational piece. I don't think he is going to be an every down player. I think Troy Anderson is some of those guys that, if you're going off of ADP or what your system tells you, he may be lower and he's really not. So those are some linebackers, and we're going to talk about two DBs here as well. And they're going to be Jaquan Brisker and Jalen Petrie. Brisker, we'll talk about him first. He went to Chicago. He looks like he could almost immediately become a starter. They have a poor team. We are probably going to see them on defense a lot. And he was very good in college. There was, in my opinion, 5, maybe even 6 rookie safeties this year that I believe are worth drafting in a 5-round draft. Now, there's a lot of DBs. So some teams just not in a position to add another DB to their roster. In our rookie draft, I believe 3 of them were taken. You've got Kyle Hamilton, Lewis Seen, you have Daxton Hill, you've got Brisker, Petrie, and then there's Cook as well, who could be that 6th guy. But Brisker, I think he's worth a stash. Some of these depth charts for rookies on defense, we just kind of have to wait and see. But I think he does have an opportunity to come into a starting role on that team right away and produce. I don't think he's going to be Jeremy Chin, but he could be good, DB too. Same with Petrie. He's coming in Houston, and Reed just went to Kansas City. They've had I can't remember his name right now. They've had one of their DBs has been going back and forth between corner and safety with injuries and whoever they had that they could fill a defense with last year. We talked about the Texans earlier. They are not going to be great. We don't expect them to be great. We expect their defense to be on the field quite a bit. Another guy who just could put up some tackle numbers, and he could, coming down into a box role. I think these guys, he could play anywhere on the field. I think he can play deep cover. I think he can play down in the box. I think he can play nickel role. I think he can do all of those things. And if he can earn snaps, which, like we said, this team is not very good, I don't think it's going to take a ton of competition for him to get out on the field. So if he can get out there and if he can get you some tackles, he may be a serviceable DB2 in year one. But DBs, they take sometimes a full year to kind of become fantasy relevant. Sometimes we see them fantasy relevant because they're bad in the NFL, because they're getting picked on, they're getting thrown at, and they're getting the tackles. All of these things are possibilities. But the biggest thing is consistent snaps. When you look at a defensive player, whether it's a linebacker, a DB, you're looking for them to be, coming downhill, making tackles, or to be a ball hawk. You're looking for them to be on the field almost 100% of the snaps. And I think both of those rookie safeties could be that guy. I didn't talk about him much, but Daxton Hill, I think, is also one of those guys. But his production, in my opinion, relies more on Jesse Bates and how this situation plays out. Jesse Bates wants a new contract. Von Bell's on the last year of his contract. Jesse Bates is franchise tagged. So Daxton Hill, if you're looking for an IDP DB that you can maybe stash for a year who may not give you instant production, but if Von Bell or Jesse Bates go down, he's there. He could still play the nickel. He is a very good DB. And if next year, say Jesse Bates plays on the franchise tag this year, they don't give him money and he leaves. Von Bell, getting older. He's on the last year of his guaranteed money, maybe even his whole contract. I would have to verify that one, though. May just be his guaranteed money. But they're going to need a good DB. And Jesse Bates has been very good, and Daxton Hill is very good. So I don't think, he's got the NFL experience needed to step into that role. You obviously want Jesse Bates to be there, but worst case scenario, they drafted a good young DB who could provide some upside. So that's going to do it for today's episode. I just want to talk about some rookies that could have some year one value. We're not talking league winning value, but we're talking about they may go up in price that you can flip for mid-round draft capital next year. And that's the capital that you use to package in trades to move up in drafts. That's the draft picks that you use to throw in with a player to upgrade. You got to remember how valuable these picks are mid-season and when you get to that next draft, because the player's value can go way down. If you lose these guys and they don't work out, you drop them week 3 and you pick up somebody off of waivers. You're not losing really anything. Some of these guys you're getting for $0. I just picked up Daniel Bellinger for free. Pierre Strong, he was a 4th round pick. John Mechie, 4th round pick. Jaylen Tolbert, middle of the 3rd. Some of these guys, especially if you're an IDP where these picks get pushed down and these picks are more valuable, it's very easy to acquire some of those picks and just flip these players. Just get Kenny Golladay to disappear and Daniel Bellinger catches 8 passes one week and you flip him for a 3rd round pick, and next year you like the players who are drafted in the 3rd round, it's like the 2nd round in a non-IDP league, because you've got 10 to 12 defensive players that are going by the 3rd round. So it is very easy to flip those players for picks that can turn into another guy that you could flip down the road, or the fact that you get the player off your team and you're no longer tied to his success and it's just the value of the pick. You can go invest in a player for a playoff push. You can use it to upgrade a wide receiver up a tier. You could use it to go get a depth piece that you want for the playoffs, like a older AJ Green or a Emmanuel Sanders last year who didn't work out, a Jamison Crowder this year, something like that. So all of these things are you're planning right now. The way you're constructing your team right now is you're planning for the season. You're not planning to set a lineup. And right now, these guys' value can only go up. And if it goes down, it doesn't hurt you, right? If their value goes up from one good camp report, one good preseason game, all of this does not affect your starting lineup week 1. But you can get assets that will help you when you come to week 1 and you're ready to set a lineup if you need to improve on your production. If it doesn't happen by week 1 and you still think, hey, these guys could work out and I can flip them mid-season to somebody who has an injury, somebody who thinks that they're rebuilding and is going to invest in a young player, or wants to get a veteran off their team, and you throw it in as a piece to just push the deal over the edge. Those are what these players are good for. So keep that in mind as you're looking at these guys. Some of the players that may give you a little bit more production may be on your waiver wire right now, because long-term, they really don't benefit you. You may be looking at a week 1 production player that doesn't have that week 1 production anymore because a rookie comes into camp and looks great. So take these high upside plays, take the guys who can be immediately flipped, take the guys who you think can provide value to a team, even if it's not yours. So that's going to do it for today. I thank you guys for coming back and hanging out with me. I know I've been gone for a little while. We're going to get another episode out on Thursday today, talking about some of those guys in this rookie class who you don't expect production, but you're willing to take a flyer on. Somebody you're stashing on your taxi and hoping it works out. So we'll talk about that on Thursday. Thank you guys for hanging out. Make sure you go over to my Twitter @HeartSportsTalk. Enter the giveaway for an NFL Shop gift card. If you like the content, let me know either on Twitter, YouTube comments. Have a great day, and I'll see you Thursday.